Good evening, Tante Anine. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. I'm Daryl Stranger. The 4th anniversary of the final report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is this weekend. With that in mind, Ottawa announced more than $116 million in support Monday morning. It's earmarked for victims and families of crimes related to MMIWG. APTN's Fraser Needham reports.
Hilda Anderson-Peers is the chair of the National Family and Survivors Circle.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Hilda Anderson-Peers. I'm the chair
She said the funding will allow families affected by MMIWG to access support services across the country.
This funding will support Indigenous-led, culturally safe, and trauma-informed family and victim-centered approaches. Individuals and families must be able to access services and supports regardless of where they lived. And this is really critical because we know in remote and isolated locations, opportunities to access services and supports are minimal.
About $96 million of the funding will be delivered over 5 years. The other roughly $20 million is ongoing. Justice Minister David Lametti said one of the key things is the support services will be Indigenous-led.
Indigenous agencies and organizations have the knowledge and the expertise to help overcome the barriers that Indigenous people who are victims of crime face when accessing services and supports. Indigenous agencies and organizations know what they need from the justice system and what they need to assist victims in their healing journey.
Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller added a portion of the funding for families will continue after the initial 5-year commitment, as called for in the final report on MMIWG.
Failure to provide these funds in a systemic way, in an Indigenous-led way, means that people continue to go missing and often turn up dead, or in the case of their families and the survivors, do not get the closure and accountability that that is due. And in turn, they become vulnerable.
Anderson-Peers said it will also allow families to get more information when a loved one goes missing or has been murdered.
I would say that, it could involve the potential of hiring a private investigator, because I know this has been repeatedly shared with me when I was the director of the MMIWG liaison unit, with the gaps in policing and responses and other mechanisms that are, out there that are not necessarily responding in the way that families and victims are looking for supports. It could also potentially, support legal advocacy too. So
Monday's announcement comes from funds previously announced as part of Budget 2023. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
APTN News has obtained a confidential memorandum and report from the Assembly of First Nations National Chief's Office. They've been verified by the National Chief's Office as Roseanne Archibald's response to a summary report on the third-party investigation into allegations she engaged in harassment and wrongdoing. Leanne Sanders has the latest.
The confidential memorandum to the First Nations in Assembly, dated May 29, 2023, includes the National Chief's own summary report of the investigation's findings. That investigation was prepared by Raquel Chisholm of Emond Harnden LLP and delivered to the Chiefs in Assembly on May 18, 2023. It looked into complaints by 5 different people who alleged the National Chief engaged in workplace harassment and created a toxic or poisoned work environment. The summary of the investigative report by Chisholm did not provide details of the allegations or findings for confidentiality purposes, other than to confirm the National Chief's conduct amounted to harassment in 2 of the 5 reports. The investigation also found that Archibald breached the confidentiality of all 5 complainants, as well as reprisal. Quote, "We conclude that by making statements that question the motives, intentions, and integrity of the staff members that have made complaints, and by making that suggestion in a public venue, the respondent's conduct amounts to reprisal." Unquote. In her response, Archibald writes she felt, quote, "compelled to set the record straight." Archibald makes 3 recommendations. The first, asking chiefs to urge their regional chiefs to, quote, cease using corporate means to usurp the will of the chiefs, the FNIA, and to have peace, healing, and reconciliation within the AFN as a whole. Separate politics from business, remove the national chief and regional chiefs from the AFN Secretariat Board, and replace with an interim board. And complete a fulsome report to examine the active lawsuits, complaints, and exit interviews from former AFN staff with the intent of eliminating toxicity within the AFN Secretariat, unquote. APTN News has reached out to Chisholm, who says she will not be commenting. Archibald's memo concludes by saying, quote, "It is imperative that chiefs, leadership, demand to see the full HR investigation report to read the facts for themselves. Once the full HR reports are rightfully shared with the First Nations in Assembly, everyone will agree that National Chief has been substantively exonerated," unquote. The report says the National Chief's legal counsel disputes the findings and says that 93% were found to be unsubstantiated. Her legal counsel is expected to provide full details to chiefs in Assembly before June 28th. The National Chief was not made available for an interview. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
National Chief Roseanne Archibald released a statement right after we aired this report on Tuesday. She called the ongoing leaks to the media a concern and said it is her, quote, obligation to protect the integrity of the AFN while making sure it is truthful, transparent, and accountable to our communities, unquote. Albertans went to the polls Monday to decide who governs the province for the next 4 years. The United Conservative Party won another majority. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to a couple of rookie MLAs at NDP headquarters when all the votes were counted.
Most polls had the United Conservative Party winning yesterday's election, but not all. Some gave the Alberta NDP a chance. And hundreds of supporters were on hand in downtown Edmonton to watch the live results and cheer for their candidates. The NDP swept Edmonton in orange. 2 Cree candidates won their constituencies, Jody Calahoo Stonehouse and Brooks Arcan Paul. Calahoo Stonehouse took Edmonton Rutherford. APTN spoke to her right after she found out she had won.
I am so grateful and appreciative of the ceremonies, the prayers, the love. You know, so many folks came out to volunteer. I am just humbled, thankful, and really excited about the work that lies ahead.
She says she went outside Edmonton to drum up support.
I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Banff, Canmore, spend some time in Morley, really encouraging people to get out and vote. Went up north to Lesser Slave Lake, to Driftpile, to those beautiful nations, you know, and it's exciting to see our people get involved in provincial politics.
Brooks Arcan Paul won in Edmonton West Henday. He found out he had won when he was being interviewed live on CBC.
We have 2 Indigenous candidates as MLAs in this province. That is huge. This is a win for our communities. This will be a strong voice to ensure that every single Albertan, whether they are Indigenous, whether they're queer, whether they are a member of communities that require diversity and inclusion, we will speak with them on their behalf.
He says he will start work immediately.
We will continue fighting every single day to ensure our treaty rights are protected, to ensure our rights as Indigenous folks are protected, and we will make sure that we as the NDP will protect every single Albertan.
But sweeping Edmonton was not enough to beat the UCP. Premier-elect Danielle Smith spoke to her supporters in Calgary.
Now, many folks wrote us off, even just as recently as last month. But you know what happened? Despite it all, today Albertans chose to move our province forward by re-electing a strong, stable, united, Conservative majority government.
NDP leader Rachel Notley spoke to her party faithful and says she will stay on as their leader.
We will never stop working to rebuild our public health care, to support the well-being of our communities, to protect our mountains, our pensions, and our kids' education, all while ensuring we have an economy that works for absolutely all Albertans.
In the end, unofficially, the UCP captured 49 seats. The New Democrats, 38 seats, up 14 seats from 2019. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
All right, we have to step aside for a moment. We'll have plenty more news when we come back. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. Members of the Métis National Council set priorities at a high-end meeting in Ottawa on Thursday. 4 presidents representing British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario met with the Prime Minister and 5 cabinet ministers. Here's our Annette Francis with that story.
Following the hugs, official handshakes, and opening remarks, the summit kicked off. The Prime Minister said it's about doing away with colonial perspectives and working together on priorities. And he said there's a number of challenges.
Emergency preparedness for our communities is something that unfortunately is going to be more and more necessary, whether it's floods or fires or other extreme weather events that are getting more frequent. Making sure we're properly coordinated with people who've known how to protect their lands and their communities for centuries is going to be really, really important.
Following the 3-hour meeting, President Cassidy Caron told media it was an opportunity to discuss issues like health equity, economic development, and K-12 education. As shown by the destruction experienced by the East Prairie Métis community in northern Alberta a few weeks ago due to wildfire, Caron said emergency management is a priority.
We've seen devastating fires in the communities within Métis Nation Alberta, Métis Nation Saskatchewan, Métis Nation British Columbia, and we need to be working together with the Government of Canada on preparedness strategies, on how we recover, how we manage the climate crisis as it disproportionately affects the Métis Nation and our communities.
Although there's been no specific action from this meeting, the Métis presidents and the government are working to get self-government legislation introduced. According to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, it's going to take more time.
I won't bore people with the dirty work of parliamentary sausage making, particularly in a minority government, because it can get a little tricky and messy. But that's really on us and on the government. Whether it passes this session, we're looking in the next couple of weeks to get it introduced. And we heard quite strongly, the Prime Minister heard quite strongly from the presidents here that they want that moved up to an earlier date.
With Parliament expected to rise later this month, the Métis self-government implementation legislation is unlikely to be passed soon. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
This weekend, the 43,000-member Manitoba Métis Federation, who are no longer members of the National Council, are holding a, quote, extraordinary General Assembly in Winnipeg. It's to vote on the Red River Métis Self-Government Recognition Treaty with Canada. President David Chartrand says it's the most important decision the Métis will make in more than 150 years. Dennis Ward asked him a few questions on that.
President Chartrand, thanks for being with us. For starters, can you tell us what this modern-day treaty will mean for the MMF and Red River Métis?
Well, we've done 3 months now of consultation, meeting thousands and thousands of our citizens, and I tell you, Dennis, it's been hard-pulling in so many occasions throughout our people. A lot of people crying, joyful, excited, just overwhelmed with finally getting this treaty taking place in Canada today. The modern day treaty will really change the essence of the relationship we have with Canada. It'll start the formation of questioning without doubt anymore that Métis are Section 35 rights holder, Red River Métis of the prairies. So this is about the Red River Métis and our homeland in the prairies. And it'll really start to solidify and legally solidify without question, even though we believe ourselves that the Constitution is already there to protect us, this will now clarify without question that this is no longer a question for anyone in this country.
Like you mentioned, in some of the correspondence leading up to this extraordinary General Assembly, it mentioned overwhelming support from citizens for this. So what will this deal mean for the average citizen?
Well, you know, that's a good question, Dennis, and that's one of the questions that have been posed by many of our citizens. What does it change in the future? Like, you know, if you look at the Métis and the struggles we face, right, we have the highest chronic illnesses in Manitoba, for example, just using the province of Manitoba. And we did a 4-year study.
Because it's not the Bible or the church, any church,
surpassing First Nations and chronic illnesses. And the number one issue is because Canada and Manitoba both resist any relationship with the Métis based on Section 35, arguing that's not the responsibility of jurisdiction. So even though we won the 2016 Daniels decision, Supreme Court of Canada, saying the federal government have fiduciary responsibility, held has not changed. And so we are now assuring ourselves, and the Prime Minister has now assured us, that he's going to negotiate a specific Métis health legislation in Canada. So it will mean, Dennis, now that in the future, that programs that we have delivering housing, education, will be solidified under the treaty and become sort of permanent programs in Canada. And we would no longer have to report like a corporation or an organization. We'll be treated like a government, as a provincial government would. So it really sets a different foundation of our relationship back and forth with Canada, but it really sets the stage for a great opportunity for future planning, future assurances that our citizens are going to get services that they should receive like Canadians in this country.
There is, of course, also some references to land in this modern-day treaty, which has raised some concerns from First Nations. Can you talk about that?
Well, Ontario First Nations, I think, have legitimate concerns. Actually, we support the First Nations in Ontario. We without a doubt, make it very clear. And as you know, that's why I left the Métis National Council. And back in 2021, my people advised me in 2019 that the Métis Nation Ontario brings all of these new people that aren't historic Métis people, we will leave the Métis National. Even though we helped develop it in 1983, we formed it. And so it's dear to our hearts. It's one of the most principal challenges we're facing right now. And you know, even Riel had that vision that his greatest fear that we'd be swarmed from inside. And so the First Nations in Ontario, I think, have a legitimate claim on what they're doing. Now, of course, without doubt, no one can ever challenge the Métis in the prairies. We built this province. We negotiated the first treaty in 1870. We supported and actually put in our advancement to Canada in 1870 under Louis Riel that treaties need to be established with the First Nation, and Treaty 1 comes in 1871, a year after our discussions with Canada. So it's very clear, without doubt, Section 35 rights of the Métis are assured without doubt by the Supreme Court of Canada on the Red River Métis and the Prairie. So that's not a question, and I don't think First Nations here will want to challenge that. If they did, well, of course, you know me, Dennis, you know our government will defend ourselves very vigorously in any action that or claim made against us, because we can prove our history, our connection to the homeland, and our development of the homeland. So that's not even a question, but I don't think you're going to see that, Dennis, not in Manitoba. We have a solid relationship with so many chiefs and councils. We have a working relationship, a respect relationship, and we both have rights, and we both know it, and we have to respect each other.
Just very quickly here, President Chartrand, assuming that, you know, like you say, there's overwhelming support for this, that it is ratified on the weekend, what's the next step?
Once this thing is passed by us on June 4th, which it will, there's not a doubt, given the fact of the overwhelming support, it goes then to our assembly in September, where either the Prime Minister himself or the Minister will be coming, probably Minister Miller, coming to sign in front of the people in September. Then he will then take it back to Parliament, and they'll vote for it in the fall. Once it's voted upon, it becomes, of course, legal, binding in Canada, and protected by the Constitution. It gets its royal assent, and it becomes law in Canada.
President Chartrand, we'll have to leave it there, but good luck with the weekend. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dennis.
All right, time to pause the news one final time. We'll have more in just a few minutes. Welcome back to APTN National News Weekend. A Mi'kmaq woman made history as the first Indigenous person to be crowned Miss Canada United World, and she's already giving back to the Indigenous community. As Angel Moore reports, she was mentoring Mi'kmaq women at the Miss Sabaganagati pageant.
16-year-old Royce Nevin became queen of the Miss Sabaganagati Princess Pageant. Placing the crown on her head was Megan Basque of the Eskazoni First Nation.
I'm feeling very confident and proud of myself. It's very empowering for everyone to acknowledge what I just did, and that's just so it makes me very proud of myself.
Just over a week ago, Basque herself was crowned Miss Canada United World. On Friday, she was a special guest at the Miss Sabaganagati pageant. Earlier in the evening, Basque gave words of advice to contestants and says this pageant is different.
For me, competing in these competitive pageants, it's so much different to seeing the pageants on reserve because everything is based on culture, as to where I'm competing that it's not.
For the last month, 13 contestants between 15 and 19 years old made ribbon skirts, learned traditional dances, and connected with community leaders. Cheryl Jihu is chair of the planning committee and a former Miss Summer Games queen. She says all the contestants represent the nation.
So the more we can teach our young women about our culture, our history, our language, the better they are going to be, these amazing matriarchs. They're going to be our future leaders. They're going to be just amazing, and I can't wait to see what they accomplish in life because I'm so in awe of them right now.
Royce will represent Sabaganagati First Nation in the Nova Scotia Summer Games pageant. Allie Martin of the Millbrook First Nation won that crown last summer.
It definitely brought my confidence up a whole lot. I used to be scared to talk on stage.
Contestants were escorted on stage by their loved ones. Rosemarie Nevin escorted her daughter, Princess Kayla Nevin. She says all the contestants are talented.
It would be so hard to judge. I know I wouldn't want to be a judge. They're all so pretty and talented.
Royce Nevin says she entered the pageant for her siblings.
But I wanted to inspire them that if you think you can do it, go do it. Don't be shy and do the best you can.
Basque says pageants help Indigenous women, which in turn helps their nation.
Take this opportunity to be a role model and inspiration for our youth, for their youth in the community as well. I think that's a big part, and volunteering and giving back to charities, I think it's a big part in pageantry.
Basque will represent Canada in the United World pageant in Texas in September. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Sabaganagati First Nation.
A mural that showcases the work of a new generation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth working together was unveiled over the weekend in Winnipeg. The mural graces the side of Harrow United Church in River Heights, a middle-class neighborhood. It depicts themes of reconciliation and healing. The group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people worked on it over the winter with other artists and an elder. It's hoped that their work will inspire other reconciliation projects throughout Winnipeg. All right, that's all we have for you this time around on APTN National News Weekend. If you missed anything from tonight or throughout the week, you can head to our website, aptnnews.ca. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech, Kinanaskmatin, have a great weekend. Private artist.